So, where to begin? I'm an expert in stress. I'm a child and family psychiatrist. I've spent over 30 years working with families, and I've approached this work with a model of stress as the chief obstacle for healthy attachment in families and parents and children and husbands and wives. And I came to this point of view about what brings people to a psychiatrist, to a child or family psychiatrist. I asked myself these questions at the very beginning of my private practice, completion of training. And prior to all this postgraduate training in psychiatry and child psychiatry, I had been introduced to Tibetan medicine on a summer in India in Dharamsala, where I studied Tibetan medicine, Buddhism, and the thing that I came away with was that Buddha's Four Noble Truths, life is suffering, there's a cause, there's a cure, and there's a plan to implement the cure, struck me as identical to what I'd learned in medical school. When we interview a patient, we take a history, the subjective, how you're feeling, the objective, the physical exam or mental exam, the assessment, and then, which is where we make a diagnosis, and then the plan, how to formulate treatment for that patient. And my conclusion was Buddha was a doctor for the human condition. And suffering, which is natural, and it arises out of our need for attachment and our fear of losing attachment, was a very profound understanding. It did not, for 2,500 years, have a mechanism. We didn't really know how we suffer. We know that life is painful. We have a body, it feels pain. But suffering is optional. Suffering is something that our minds can actually change our attitude towards, the fear of the loss of attachment, and we can do something about that. And Buddha came to the conclusion that the suffering can be reframed by cultivating two main principles: acceptance of impermanence, everything is impermanent, no attachment is secure, and the degree to which we suffer is based on our point of view. In other words, relativity. When we suffer, we're afraid. We're afraid of losing that which we love and are attached to, from our body, our health, to our loved ones or the places and things that we're attached to. Fast forward to my postgraduate training, I came upon John Bowlby, sort of the pillar of attachment theory in modern times, a renegade psychoanalyst who went against Freudian and Anna Freud at the Psychoanalytic Institutes here in London, and basically got booted out and reformulated human psychoanalytic theory with attachment, not libido, as the core motivator for human survival. And Bowlby's attachment theories became the foundation for what we now call social neuroscience, because we can study attachment in parents and children, in mind-body, in social systems. And the advent of brain imaging has allowed us to actually look at the brain and see what's going on when attachment is threatened and fear overrides the brain's functional systems, and symptoms of anxiety or depression or even psychosis get triggered. So I started to link these two things together: Buddha's attachment theory, mindfulness training, Bowlby's attachment theory, and the physiology that was beginning to be discovered. People like Bruce McEwen and Joe Ledoux, studying the amygdala and the hippocampus, began to tell us that attachment and fear of the loss of attachment is mediated through the stress regulatory system, or the allostatic system. It's a system that changes according to the demand and the need. Stress is something we need to get out of bed in the morning. We need to increase our heart rate and pump more blood to the brain when we stand up. So stress is essential to survival. Positive stress, excitement, curiosity, wonderment, leads us to explore, to create, to form attachments. But when the stresses of life, and particularly the negative emotional stresses, loss or injury, occur, which are a natural part of being a body, we have a very different response, and that acute stress response actually increases our resilience, increases our immune response, sharpens our focused attention so we can deal with those events that are triggering a stress episode. What is now called toxic stress is the result of repeated stressors, or a chronically stressed environment, or a serious trauma that is never processed and remains a just not conscious stressor in the emotional memory, what I call phantom stress, is there waiting to get triggered by some reminder in the environment. And this toxic stress is chronic. Why we call it toxic is because it doesn't really go away. You don't recover immediately from toxic stress the way you do from an episode of stress. So your stress regulatory system gets stuck. It gets stuck in the on position, and the stress hormones continue to pump and do devastating damage to tissues, brain, heart, viscera. Stress that is relentless and ongoing can emerge in any number of ways. McEwen wrote a book called The Hostage Brain somewhere in the 90s that I came across as I was working on my own book. And I went and had a meeting with him, and I said, you've covered all the ways the brain can be held hostage, and one chapter is about stress. And I said, I think I have another chapter to your book, and that is our brains can be taken hostage in relationships. So I have spent the last 25, 30 years clinically applying my skills and tools to helping people in chronic relationship stress. And they come to see me when they're on the brink of divorce, or their parenting is breaking down, or their children are becoming symptomatic, or they're having financial or substance issues, gambling, whatever. The symptoms of chronic stress begin to take a toll on the bodies, the attachments, and the whole system of the family. So from the beginnings of my thinking about this and trying to understand it, which began in medical school, to current theories about it, the notion that attachment is the origin of stress, and there's positive and negative stress, and that suffering or worrying about the loss of attachment is something we all do naturally, but how much we do it, how often we do it, is completely changeable. And here's where the mindfulness training, the ancient mindfulness training, and the current skills, cognitive behavior therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, which is a derivative of Buddhism, and my own Logosoma brain training, attempt to create a new approach to what we are physically, emotionally, cognitively, all of those conspiring to create a sense of self in the world, and ultimately a meaningful narrative of an identity. And we know the chief obstacle to that success is chronic stress. And that's what we're going to be talking about in many levels, on the mind-body level, on the relationship level, on the parent-child level, the family systems level, and eventually we'll apply some of those fundamentals from physiology to psychology to attachments in the unit of the family, which is the primary unit of culture, and apply them to cultural systems, to global systems, what I think we can safely call our present world a global village. Okay, so let's look at our ancestors facing chronic stress. And a good example of that is the Ice Age. The glaciers began to cool off Europe, and we're talking about the European ancestors. And this problem wasn't a tiger you could vanquish. It was there every day, every night, every year, no end in sight, and certainly would have triggered the what if script in the brain at a deep emotional level. So fear for survival became chronic every day, 24/7. The stress in the environment of the increasing or decreasing temperature truly threatened the individual and collective survival, and we know many didn't survive. But let's fast forward to today. We all have our own personal ice age going on in our lives, a stress that doesn't go away. You know, the top of the stress worries when we take surveys is money, security, financial security. And right after that is attachment to health and to family. So, you know, the chronic stressors that we face now, and it has become increasingly unified across the globe, is financial security and relationship security. And without the skills to adapt to and create solutions to, individuals are getting sicker as a result of the chronic stress physiology, which is elevated stress hormones, cortisol in particular, and the damages that chronic stress creates for all the tissues of the body, brain, heart, gastrointestinal systems, and others. So, you know, like our Ice Age ancestors, we all have chronic stressors to deal with, to adapt to, and to survive. Well, this is where Buddha's solutions to dealing with chronic stress were a major breakthrough in how we experience our lives. And he recruited mindfulness training. He didn't, you know, turn to gods and ritual religions and sacrifice, which were the ancestral ways to deal with fear and what if. Let the gods rescue us. We're all just hostages and God will save us. Well, he said, well, God may be a concept, but there's no proof of it. And if he is or she is there, what a fickle God it must be, because we get tossed around by nature so carelessly. So he cultivated a philosophy and a practice of mind-body relationships in the present, drawing on the yogic history of breathing, the breath being the source of all life, oxygen, focused on if the mind is turned inward and there's one thing it can regulate. It can't slow down the heart rate with mental power, but it can slow down the breathing. So the mind's ability to regulate the diaphragm's movement, the in and out movement, could actually turn on the relaxation response that's hardwired in our brains. The stress response makes the heart race faster, the diaphragm move quicker, and that elevates our physiological state. And it's really out of our control. That's when the brain gets hijacked by chronic stress. So the mind can actually slow the breathing, which will slow the heart, which will reduce the what if scenarios about a catastrophic future, and bring attention back to the what is in the body, in the present. What can I do today to stay warm in my ice age? Or what can I do today to lower the stress in my marital relationship or my job situation or my financial situation? And this is the beginning of a powerful evolution in individual and collective mindfulness, is the awareness that our mind can refocus to the body, can control our breathing, and in controlling our breathing, we turn off the stress response. The freeze, fight, flight, smoke alarm is turned off, and a relaxation response is turned on, and we begin to feel safe in our body. And anyone who's meditated knows the very rapid and profound state of peace one can attain, even when the real life chronic stressors don't go away, but you're calm in the face of these stressors. And this is really the beginning of how we deal with the chronic stressors that we all face today, is in our own mind-body relationship, with practice securing that attachment of mind and body. So we bring calm, creative, mental, emotional attention to the problems that are going to require at least a conversation with a spouse, a conversation with the work situation, a conversation with the IRS, or any other chronic stressor. And as a planet that's increasingly shrinking and facing chronic stresses that threaten our planet, it calls for calm, connect, and create solutions for our tribe of human beings. The species of humans is now collectively threatened, and the positive response to that is to recruit large numbers of mindful individuals to generate truly creative solutions for our human tribe.
Phenomenal. Okay, so we're going great here, so I'm just going to leave it so
Okay.
as it comes.
Okay. Well, let me take a break just for some water.
I'm just going to keep it filming
Mm-hmm.
while we're rolling.
This is
Dude,
no.
I went out of body just then. I was like, what? Fucking nailing it. Okay, so going back again, the framework is from
Yes.
chronic stress to global village.
Right.
We've done Ice Age, Panic Tiger.
Right.
We've done
Yeah.
how to regulate.
Right. So as we see that systemic stress regulation starts with one mind-body changing from the collective stress response to a calm individual in a system. And this is exactly what I do when I work with, let's say, a distressed couple. I will listen to them together, how they blame each other, how they're victims and the other is the victimizer, and that is only worsening, and they're teetering on divorce. They've already been living in a chronic hostage, what I call a hostage partnership, two brains locked in chronic stress, perceiving the other as the enemy. And it perpetuates to the point that they're both out of their minds, and their perceptions of each other are not based in the present reality. So what we need to do is only get one person to change that hostage loop. Let's say one member says, I don't want to do this psychobabble therapy. This is all crazy. You just need to change because you're the problem. Well, if that person says, Doc, I'm done, I can't do it, and I can get them to come in and help their mind-body training so they actually get calm and re-perceive their spouse, who their brain perceives as a victimizer, and themselves as a victim, to mindfully reframe that and say, you know, I'm stressed out, it's painful, it's difficult, but I'm not a victim. That liberation from the physiology of feeling like a victim. That's your limbic brain, emotional memory. We bring in a mindful calmness that say, this is what is. You know, you have chronic stress in the marriage. It's a problem. And it can be solved if you stop participating in the patterns that are now wired into your brain, often rooted in childhood, and really begin to live in the present, creating a new response to the negativity in the relationship. So we know that the individual training for mind-body secure connection is critical to any systemic change in a relationship, family or beyond. So we're going to want to unwrap just how the brain does this on a attentional focused training, where that attention is brought out of the hostage stress relationship into the individual, and how that new calm, creative mind-body relationship shows up in the old conversation with a new reaction. It is very common that I perceive couples where one has done some significant work and the other says, well, who are you? You know, when I scream at you, you don't defend or you don't fight back. You actually validate me. You empathize with me. And gee, that makes me want to calm down and have a conversation rather than just repeat another one of these stereotypic fights that always end the same way. So teaching stress-reducing skills to couples becomes the major approach to regulating family stress. And we'll see more about how that partnership, husband and wife, stress regulatory training applies directly to that same system where parental function is also hijacked, and the children suffer with that paralyzed hostage parent team. And we'll look at that as well. So we'll take a break there.
Okay.
So these are just basically the opening paragraph to what's this going to be about.
Yeah. So, I mean,